This is Democracy Watch. I'm joined by my co-host, voting rights attorney, and founder of Democracy Docket, a news outlet focused on voting and elections, Mark Elias. So, Mark, John Eastman, who is the architect of this idea that Pence could unilaterally anoint Trump the winner of the 2020 election that he lost, is now fighting to save his bar license. First off, what is the process for him to be able to do that?
Yeah, so John Eastman's in a lot of trouble, at least if he wants to continue to be a lawyer. The process in California, as it is in many states, is that there's a separate bar court, essentially, where these kind of claims are heard, and he'll put his defense on. But I would not bet on John Eastman being a lawyer for much longer.
Now, what signal would it send if Eastman was disbarred? Like, could it prevent other Republican lawyers from participating in efforts to overturn valid election results in the future?
Look, I think it's essential. I mean, obviously, the evidence should rule the day in that court, but we cannot have a system in which lawyers view that it is acceptable for them to undermine democracy in its most fundamental ways. I'm not talking about taking different sides in legal disputes. I mean, supporting and nurturing ideas that are anti-democratic. They are anti-free and fair election. They are anti-constitution. So I think it'll send a very, very important message to lawyers throughout the country that their obligation to the Constitution, to upholding our democracy, is critical to them having the privilege of practicing law.
Do you anticipate that he'll be indicted as part of the DOJ's case into the events of January 6th?
So I don't know. It's a really good question. I think one of the things that has always been, for me, one of the uncertainties is how hard DOJ is going to push in the DC case involving Donald Trump and the insurrection, right? We know they've pushed hard on the documents case, and we know that they've pushed hard on the lower level cases involving January 6th. But I think there needs to be real accountability for the people who are at the top of that. That includes the former president, and that includes people like John Eastman, who were the architects of what happened, what was at stake on January 6th.
Is there any reason that you could think of that the DOJ would opt not to have John Eastman be part of that indictment?
I think that the signs from the special counsel's office is that Jack Smith's going to take this all very seriously. He seems like a very aggressive prosecutor. There's been a lot of activity before grand juries. So I hope that, and he's been willing to put lawyers in the grand jury, right? We saw that with some of Trump's defense team. So I hope the answer to that is no, but the proof is going to be in the pudding.
Well, we had a judge out here in California, Judge Carter, who wrote in a recent opinion, based on the evidence, the court finds it more likely than not that President Trump corruptly attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. So obviously, John Eastman was the architect of that plan. So if we have a judge saying that based on a preponderance of the evidence, he committed a crime as part of this plan that, again, John Eastman created, what is the venue for him to actually be held accountable for committing that crime?
So the venue would be in federal district court in Washington, D.C. in a criminal proceeding if the case is criminal, right? It's one thing to say it's beyond a preponderance of the evidence, which is basically a fancy way of saying 51%. It's another thing to say it's beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a much higher standard. But I think that would be the place where a criminal case would be. Obviously, John Eastman's immediate problems are in the state of California, where he's got a bar hearing that affects his ability to practice law, but does not fully vindicate, I think, the rights of the country to have accountability for the people who were masterminding January 6th.
John Eastman joins a nice long list of Trump lawyers who've seen their fortunes kind of fall in hitching their wagons with Donald Trump. Can you just speak briefly on what other Trump attorneys have been sanctioned or disbarred as a result of their participation in Donald Trump's schemes?
Sure. I mean, you start with Rudy Giuliani, right? How quickly we forget, but Rudy Giuliani, who was, the master of the parking lot press conference, saying fraud, he has already faced the music before the bar. Jenna Ellis, who was also one of those lawyers who was spreading lies, she has faced sanctions to her bar in Colorado. We've seen lots of Trump lawyers and Republican lawyers in courts like in Michigan over their involvement in trying to perpetuate the big lie in the post-election. We saw Trump lawyers just get sanctioned in Florida in a case where they brought a frivolous racketeering action. So being a Trump lawyer gives you like one part celebrity among the misfits, one part chance of being disbarred, and one part just having to live with yourself for, what you have done to democracy.
Yeah, all the while, the likelihood that you're getting paid is a lot less than that.
That does seem to be true.
Yeah. Mark, in Democracy Docket, I want to read a paragraph that you wrote. You wrote, "We must redouble our efforts to protect the elections that will take place in 2024. This includes the traditional programs aimed at recruiting and training volunteers to work at the polls and protect voters. But these tactics alone, like organizing voters, will not beat back the tide of voter suppression and election subversion. To do that, progressive organizations will need to think bigger, bolder, and more creatively." So you wrote those things. What do you suggest in terms of bolder and more creative solutions to beat back the tide of voter suppression and election subversion? If you can give a blueprint to state legislatures or organizations, what would you suggest?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to recognize the moment we're in. Donald Trump will do anything to hold on to his freedom, his liberty, and he believes that's tied to regaining power in 2024. The Republican Party will not be a check on anything he wants to do. They will facilitate it at every stage. So when I say we need to be bigger and bolder and act more aggressively, it is against a reality that we are not engaged in the typical back and forth between two political parties that are operating more or less in good faith. One party is totally not operating in good faith. So what are the kinds of things I think we need to think about? We need to be much, much more protective of the voting process. We need to ban voter challenges. We need to not facilitate, it's a charming thing when you used to have bipartisan poll observers, right? They sat there with their little buttons that said Democratic observer, Republican observer, and it was part of the pageantry of democracy. Well, guess what?
As opposed to these white militia groups coming with AR-15s and standing outside.
That's exactly right. You've like made the point, right? That's the thing, is we need to give up some of the romanticism of this and be very practical. Like, you should not be able to intimidate voters. And if that means creating more of a buffer around the voting process, so be it. Same with the certification process. We need to be much more hard-nosed in making sure that we are going to have the people in place and the mechanisms in place that the winner of the elections are going to be accurately certified.
Do you feel that Trump's indictment is going to cause Republicans to double down on the anti-democratic behavior, or will this prospect of just at least some shreds, some modicum of accountability that we've seen thus far kind of chill that semblance of lawlessness?
Oh my God, chill it. It's heating it up. It's boiling it. It's got a flame going. I mean, the Republican Party is all in with Trump. They are all in with Trump. Even if it's not Trump, they're in with Trump, right? So what we are seeing right now is a worse expression of the Republican Party than we saw in 2020. Think about it this way, and ask everyone who's watching this really, really important show to take a moment and envision who was the extreme Republican in your mind in 2020. Who was the person who was like outside the mainstream in 2020? Now think of where that person is today. They're firmly in the mainstream. They're running the show. They're running Kevin McCarthy's show in the House. And so we cannot be romanticized about what the Republican Party is going to bring in 2024.
Yeah, and I think that was perfectly put. Seems like a good place to end there. So for those watching, I think it's clear right now what Mark and his team have done to protect all facets of democracy across this country. So what we can do for Mark and his team is sign up for Democracy Docket. That's the outlet that they run about voting and election integrity. So the link is right here in the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. So make sure to sign up. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.